I've been meaning to work on a project that's different from my usual ones for a while now, and the other day I came across a Paludarium with a raining feature, so I thought I might as well try it out. I should mention that before filming this, I did a few test runs to make sure the concept would work. First things first, I need to de-rim this 5-gallon tank. De-rimming a tank like this is a fairly easy process. I started by running my razor blade along the inside of the rim. I also carved upwards to cut the corners. I also cut on top of the rim where the corners are and repeated the process on the inside of the tank. What I'm trying to do here is detach the rim from the silicone that's holding it to the tank. If done right, this can work extremely well. Rimless tanks are fairly expensive to buy, so I find de-rimming them is the best option. However, I wouldn't recommend going over 10 gallons with this technique unless you're only planning on filling it halfway. Filling it up all the way can cause the glass to bow and or break. After loosening up the rim, I could start to peel it off. Sometimes the rim doesn't come off in one piece, or it needs a little more cutting to loosen it up. If you work with it enough though, it should come off pretty easily. I won't show me de-rimming the bottom, as it's basically the same as the top. You'll see I had to go back and cut it quite a few times. This was because I didn't cut it all the way in the first cut, and I had to loosen it up more. I could do a more in-depth tutorial on how to de-rim a tank in the future, so let me know down in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in. It's a fairly straightforward process, but there are a few tips and tricks to make it easier. Anyway, I continued to repeat the process on all 4 sides. Also, be careful when you're pulling off the rim and don't force it too much. As you can see here, I accidentally broke the corner of the glass, which required me to buy an entirely new tank and de-rim it. After de-rimming the new tank, there's a bunch of excess silicone. This can be easily removed with a razor blade. Luckily, the silicone comes off pretty easily, and I have to repeat this process on all sides and the bottom. Also, after scraping off the silicone, there's usually smudges left behind, but these can be easily removed with some rubbing alcohol. Anyway, I need to make a water reservoir, so I'm gonna have to cut a piece of glass. I measured for the correct size, lined up a ruler, cut it with my tool, and lightly tapped the glass so it could be snapped in half. Glass cutting can be a pretty tricky process, and I'm still getting used to it myself. Now that the glass is done, I can attach it to the tank. Before I do that, I need to wipe it down with rubbing alcohol to remove dust and debris. I also did this with the piece that I cut. After I did that, I laid down some painting tape so I could get nice clean beads of silicone. This is a super easy way to make sure you get clean beads of silicone, because all you have to do is apply the silicone, then rip off the tape, and everything should look perfect. You'll also see that I added a few pieces of tape to the sides. This is so that I could hold it in place while the silicone cures. Now that everything's taped up, I can start to apply the silicone. Just a nice clean bead on the bottom and up the sides of the tank. Now that the silicone is applied, I could set the glass in place. This is where those pieces of tape on the sides come in handy, as they'll stop it from falling over. Once I had the glass applied, I smoothed out the inside bead with my finger. While the silicone cures, I need to address the raining mechanism. Like I said earlier in the video, I ran a few tests before actually going forth with this. First things first, I need to cut a piece of plexiglass. This follows basically the same steps as cutting glass, except using a razor blade instead of a glass cutting tool. Also, I sanded down the sides because they were a bit rough. After the plexiglass was cut, I drilled a hole in the back to account for the airline tubing. This process is a bit confusing right now, but I'll explain it a little bit later. Anyway, once the airline tubing hole was drilled, I drilled a bunch more little holes. This was a bit of a long and tedious process, but eventually I got it done. Once all the holes had been drilled, I could silicone it into the tank. You'll see I didn't tape this piece like I did the other piece. This is because this whole area will be hidden anyway. Once I applied the silicone to the piece, I slid it in about an inch from the top. This was quite a messy process, but like I said, all of this will be hidden anyway, so it doesn't matter. I also cut another small piece of glass to cover the front with that I siliconed in place. also had to use some more tape on this piece because it wouldn't stay up by itself. With the tank itself finished, it's time to make a base and canopy. I started by measuring the sides and front of the tank and cutting a few pieces of 1/8 inch plywood. After I had all the pieces cut, I started supergluing them together. I only did this for the canopy because I needed to put lighting inside of it, but the base is a little bit different. I wouldn't say superglue is the ideal choice for this, but unfortunately I didn't have any other glue, so this will work for now. I also ended up using a few pieces of duct tape on the corners to hold everything together. I also put some duct tape on the inside. Once I had the canopy assembled, I set the tank on it so it would hold its shape. Luckily my measurements were correct and it fit perfectly. This is what I mean about superglue not being the ideal option, as it takes a long time to dry and I had to use more tape to make sure it dries in place. With the canopy drying, I can start to make the base. This is what I meant about it being a bit different, as I can use 2x4s instead of it being completely hollow. Also, the 2x4s weren't completely tall enough on their own, so I added a piece of plywood. After that, I attached the paneling in place with some nails. Like I did with the canopy, I set the tank on to test fit. Again, everything fit perfectly. I should also mention that I laid down a piece of craft foam to evenly distribute weight. Now that the canopy is dry, I can start to add the lights. These are just some LED puck lights that I got off Amazon, and they should work just fine. You can also see that I added a few strips of wood in the canopy. That was so that it would hold it up a bit. With the base and canopy done, it's time to start the background. I'm using a little bit of egg crate to create a sort of land area. I also attached some to the background. This is so that the stones would have something to attach to. I dry fit the pieces at first, and once I was happy with them, I siliconed them all in place. Once the silicone had cured, I could start to scape the background. I first started by placing in the airline tubing so that I could build around it. For the background rocks, I'm just using some stereo stone that I had left over from a previous project and making sure to leave gaps in between the rocks for moss. Now seems like a pretty good time to explain to you how the raining mechanism works. There's a pump at the bottom that's submerged in water that shoots water all the way up to the top area we made earlier. The water then falls through the holes and creates a raining effect. Once I had a layout I was happy with, I could proceed to foam it in with great stuff gaps and cracks expanding foam. This stuff adheres to the rocks super well and doesn't take that long to dry. You can also see that I repeated this process on the land area. Once the foam was dry, I went back and pressed it down with my finger and used a razor blade to carve it a bit. Once that was done, I filled the bottom with sand. The water area is not the main focus of this tank, but there are going to be a few plants down here. Once the sand was in, I started adding sphagnum moss to the background. You can also see that the cord of the pump goes up the background and out the front of the tank. The reason I'm adding sphagnum moss is to create a better growing medium for the actual moss. Before we actually plant the moss though, I need to address the land area. To fill it, I'm just using a very coarse gravel so that it won't clog up the filter. I also added sphagnum moss to the top of the land area. With all that done, now I can bring it to life with moss. Moss loves humid environments, so an environment like this with constant water supply will be perfect. You also may have noticed that I didn't add sphagnum moss to the front of the land area. This is because I'll be using Java moss that'll be completely submerged in water. Adding sphagnum moss would make it too loose and it would fall out. I think the combination of cereus stone and moss looks amazing, and I'll definitely consider using it in the future. Then I added all the Java moss. With the moss in place and the background done, I could start the hardscape. I'm using spiderwood for this because I feel like its texture and color contrasts really nice with the background. With the hardscape finished, I could start to plant the tank starting with an asparagus fern. Then I added a small piece of ivy. Unfortunately, these were the only two plants I could find at the time, so I just used these throughout the whole tank. Once I got the plants done, I filled the tank up with water. Now it's time to add the aquatic plants. I'm using an assortment of plants including a Java fern and a red Reuben sword. the aquatic plants in, that completes the build. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this was a completely new project for me. I'm very happy with the way this turned out, and I love the rain feature. I'm also interested to see how this holds up long term. The reason I say that is because this project was a bit messy, and there were a few parts that I had to improvise on. Either way, I had a ton of fun making this one, and I can't wait to make more like this. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments, and if you'd like to see more stuff like this. I also want to say that as of recording this video, I hit my first 100 subscribers. I want to say thank you to everybody who's supported me so far, and I can't wait to show you what I have in store next. Anyway, that's all I got for you in this one. I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did, and I can't wait to work on more like this. Thanks for watching.